Welcome in, everybody, to the CFB Nation All-America podcast. My name is Bill Troche, senior editor at sportingnews.com, joined as always by our lead college football writer, Bill Bender at sportingnews.com. Thank you to everyone for listening to this podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and for those of you watching on our YouTube channel at CFB Nation. If you have the time to leave a review on Apple, that would be great. Or if you have time to leave some comments and a like on the YouTube channel, that would be great. Thank you to Irish Breakdown, your source for Notre Dame football information. They have a tremendous lineup of podcasts and great stories at irishbreakdown.com. You can follow Bill on Twitter at BillBender92, and you can follow me at Bill Troche. And keep an eye on the main Sporting News account at Sporting News. We stand 3 weeks from week 0. It's getting really real. We were about to preview the Pac-12, but rather than go on the field, we have to go off the field, Bill. And I know that's not what we want to be doing 3 weeks from the season.
How can you preview a conference that might not exist in a week, Bill? I mean, that's where we're at. No, I'm making a joke, sort of, but it's definitely tenuous times for the Pac-12, and so we might as well talk about what people love talking about, and that's more realignment.
I mean, I'm a fan of the Pac-12. I was thinking to myself, what Pac-12 teams and games I have seen through the years. I've been to Pauley Pavilion for a UCLA Washington State college basketball game. And I went to the Orange Bowl in Jim Harbaugh's final game at Stanford against Virginia Tech. And I've seen Oregon and UCLA in the NCAA tournament games, first round games at different sites, one in Nashville, one in Detroit. So I don't have a ton of experience seeing the league, but I'm a big fan.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I'm not, because I grew up not like. No, I'm kidding. When you grow up in Big Ten country, you grew up conditioned not to like the Pac-12 because USC or UCLA or Stanford was in the Rose Bowl. I enjoyed Pac-12 football, though. I enjoy staying up late and watching it. And really enjoyed it last year. I mean, because of the good games it put out there, and I just see a conference that's on the endangered species list, and I think a lot of it is, some of it's self-inflicted, some of it is, we'll get into it in this podcast, and then we're going to have a really heated segment later, which I can't wait for.
Are you talking about the blame game, Bill?
Mm-hmm.
Blame game is on the list. But first, before we get into everything, we'll kick it off with some Troche trivia in honor, I guess, in quotes, of realignment. And then we'll have the answer at the end of the show. You rebounded last week and got the trivia question. This one is going to be tough, okay? Mm-hmm. Last time Colorado won 10-plus games as a member of the Big 12 was in 2001. Mm-hmm. They went 10-3, lost to Oregon in the Fiesta Bowl. They had a very interesting season, but they ended up losing to Oregon in the Fiesta Bowl. Mm-hmm. They had 2 quarterbacks split time that year, and they had 2 main running backs split time. Can you name either the pair of quarterbacks or the pair of running backs for Colorado?
In 2003? 2001.
2001 team that made the Fiesta Bowl. They upset Nebraska on the last day of the regular season, kept Nebraska out of the BCS championship game until they didn't, because Nebraska snuck back in 2 weeks later. So, yeah, it's a challenging question, but the quarterbacks each basically threw for, 1,900 yards. I don't have it in front of me, but the both running backs ran for over 900 yards. So
you realize I was in college in 2001, so there's like a memory issue here.
Well, they beat Texas in one of those Big 12 championship game upsets.
Right.
And then they landed in the Fiesta Bowl.
I'll see what I can come up with. That's tough one, though.
It is a tough one. So, but you have a history of coming up big in the Troche trivia department.
We'll see what I can come up with.
To recap, for people who are listening to this and are not totally enthralled with realignment and what's happening in the Pac-12 Commissioner George Klavikoff presented the media deal that he's been negotiating for over a year on Tuesday. We are recording this Wednesday morning. I feel like we're in a 48-hour sort of lull right now. But to recap, it looks like the deal that Klavikov presented, the main carrier would be Apple TV, and then the games would be on a special Pac-12 add-on subscription. So people would have to subscribe to Apple, and then they would have to additionally subscribe to the Pac-12 channel. The guarantee per school rumored to be about in the low 20s million per school. And then depending on how many subscriptions are sold, the money would go up from there. The feeling is that it would take an extraordinary amount of subscriptions to reach what the Big 12, is offering per school, which is over $31 million per team annually. So you got $31 million versus $20 million plus whatever subscriptions they get is the basic outline right now. The Arizona Board of Regents had a meeting shortly after the presentation yesterday, and Pete Thamel of ESPN said there were no immediate decisions expected. The presidents and Klavikov will have agreed to obviously meet again very soon to discuss the deal, maybe going back to Apple, who knows. So those are the basic outlines. My first question, are you surprised at what the Pac-12 ended up presenting yesterday?
No, because most of it leaked. There was a lot of national reporters did some good work. 24/7 Sports Arizona writer did some really good work. And obviously, it's one of those deals where, we'll see. But doesn't seem like a lot of money. Doesn't seem like a lot of TV revenue, in terms of where are you going to find it? It's risky with a subscription-based thing with Apple. I know I'm thinking about this, Bill. That's probably the future of college football in some ways. I get that. But it's not. The networks have so much money, and it's so hard to compete with ESPN and Fox and ABC and CBS. And it feels a little bit like Pac-12 will be hard to find, out of sight, out of mind. And that's tough to sell in a group full of, even though streaming may be the future on some level, it's tough to sell right now.
Yeah. So Apple has of course, a streaming deal with the MLS, and almost all MLS games are now on Apple, and subscriptions skyrocketed, but only when Lionel Messi decided to transfer to Miami. And now that Messi is in the league, a lot of people are subscribing. I don't think it was a runaway success before Messi made that sort of unexpected decision. So that was a bonus for Apple right there. Ross Dellinger reported that the Pac-12 went back to NBC for the third time during these negotiations with a very low price, didn't say what it was, trying to get NBC to buy in to a certain amount of games. NBC said, no, thank you. ESPN and Fox apparently will be able to broadcast some of the higher profile games as a partner with Apple, but the money would go to Apple and not to the schools, is what I understand. This was where the Big 12 was really smart in their negotiations with Fox and ESPN, is that pro rata deal, where if they added a Power 5 school, ESPN would add $31 million to the contract, which they would pass through to the school. So the pie in the Big 12 is not getting divided by extra pieces taken out. It's not getting smaller for each school if you expand. That was very smart by Yormak to do that. So I don't know. The way Klavikov presented himself in Las Vegas at the Pac-12 Media Days, it sounded like he had a fairly robust offer from somebody. We didn't really know who it was, but he was talking very confidently. But I thought the first indication was that Colorado bolted before they even saw the numbers. So they must have had a sense that the numbers weren't going to be great, and then they ended up not being great. So I was a little surprised, a little disappointed. I was hoping they would be fairly robust. And I thought, if if Colorado wants to go to the Big 12, they're the worst team in the league. That's fine. They have history in the Big 12. That's fine. Geographically, it makes sense for them. This conference, the Pac-12 conference, could survive without Colorado as long as they had a decent media deal. But it turns out it doesn't look like they got one.
No, and I mean, the big thing is security. I mean, one thing that sticks out with me is Mike Gundy at Big 12 Media Day talked about how important it was for Yormark to ensure the league's future through 2031. That might not seem like a big deal, but 8-9 years is now it might as well be 30 years in college football. To have that kind of blanket security through the opening stages of the 12-team college football playoff era, that matters. And for somebody like Mike Gundy to say that matters to the school clearly. So, yeah, it's not a good deal for the Pac-12. It's just some schools are going to have to stomach not making money and trying to get playoff access. But the reality is, and I asked you this question openly the other day, and I can ask it on here, is like, I wouldn't consider the Pac-12 a Power 5 conference with its current makeup. I would consider them more of a group of 5 conference or group of 6. So let's be honest about it. It's like, we say Power 5, group of 5. To me, it would be Power 2, kind of Power 2, kind of not Power 2, which would be the American Athletic Conference in the Pac-12, group of 4. I'm going to trademark that and get the T-shirt because the ACC and the Big 12 will be the kind of Power 2 now, and then they're the next two. Then it's Power 2 next to. Yep. And that's what anybody could say, well, that's not true. Well, look at what the Big 12 looks like now. And you tell me that's anywhere close to the SEC or the Big 10.
Not at the top. Certainly not. When you talk about security, too, if the Pac-12 is smart, they will, this deal, which isn't great, that if they end up agreeing to do it, they're going to keep it short term so they can get back to market. Hopefully, when the market has turned back positively and media rights are going for big dollars like they have been for the past 10 years, I think Klavikov had a little bit of bad luck trying to negotiate in this, and the Big 12 had good luck grabbing that $31 million just before there was a big downturn in the kind of the TV market and the sports media market. And there's no competition right now between, like, everyone's set except the Pac-12, so they're sort of bidding against themselves right now, and the TV entities realize that, and they're not giving them a lot of money. So my guess is whatever deal that they do finally agree to is going to be short term so they can get back in the market fairly quickly, and that goes against your point of trying to establish long-term security. So the interesting thing is Arizona State, Arizona, and Utah all going to leave. Ross Dellinger at Yahoo Sports this morning had some interesting reporting saying that the Arizona State president has always been an advocate, a strong advocate for the Pac-12, Pac-10 when it was Pac-10, and he carries a lot of influence in the Board of Regents room. The Board of Regents also prefer strongly that Arizona and Arizona State are in the same conference. And I think it has been presented that the Arizona president is more open to leaving than the Arizona State president. So it's kind of up in the air. Dennis Dodd had an interesting tweet that said none of the 3 corner schools remaining necessarily want to be the ones to leave and really contribute to the demise of the conference individually. If all 3 go, it kind of shares the blame a little bit. So I feel like it's 50-50 right now. I really don't know what's going to happen. Reading all the tea leaves, reading the reporting, reading the leaks. What do you think is going to happen? I'll put you right on the spot. I mean, it's so hard to predict, but I'll put you on the spot.
They'll leave. Like Arizona and Arizona State will definitely leave eventually. Like when you meet and the amount of money and, like, can Arizona will be the same football wise in the Big 12 as they are in the Pac-12. Maybe even an opportunity to be better. Arizona State, same deal. The recruiting in Arizona is not bad. I read Ari at the Athletic. He lived, he's from out there. Like, they have really good high school football in Arizona. And if you
Their
go
problem for years is they haven't been able to sign any of those kids.
right, but maybe if you're playing in the Big 12, you can recruit into Texas a little bit and Jed Fish a little bit bigger spotlight for Arizona State as well. I mean, I would go to the Big 12 if I was both of them. Utah's kind of flexible too. I mean, they've had success in the Pac 12, but they could move to the Big 12 and be just as successful. Probably. The only thing with Utah is probably going to feel a little bit like the Mountain West Conference all over again, because they'll be like, oh, TCU, they're back. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But TCU and Utah are two of the programs that have taken advantage of all the realignment. Not every school does. Those two did. And I think they'll leave. I think they'll leave. And it just makes more sense for those schools to take the money. And they can say they feel bad about the Pac-12 all they want, but you can, at the end of the day, if you're any one of those schools, you can point to USC and UCLA and say they did it first.
So where does Washington and Oregon end up in your scenario? You think they're gone? They don't really have an offer from the Big 12. They don't have an offer from the Big 10. They don't really have an offer from the ACC. That was lukewarm at best, according to Dellinger's reporting. What happens to them?
Well, there's what they should do and what they will do, and what should happen and what I think will happen. And what should happen is they should stay in the Pac-12. They should stay. They should convince Utah, Arizona, and Arizona State to stay in the Big Pac-12. Did I say Big 12? The Pac-12. They should all stay together. They should add a couple schools like San Diego State and, whoever else out of the Mountain West Conference. They should make a conference of 12. They should accept that the money's not great, but they can still get in the playoff. Washington and Oregon can still get in the playoff. The big problem with this theory, that sounds great, but Washington and Oregon want to be, they don't want to be in a spot where we have to find them on TV. So what I think will happen ultimately, if the Big Ten wants them, the Big Ten could take Oregon and Washington. The Big Ten could take Cal and Stanford. They could take 4 Pac-12 schools as a life preserver type deal, bring them in, have 20 teams. I don't know if it's good, but I think, Oregon and Washington, if those 3 schools go to the Big 12, I think it makes sense for Oregon and Washington to just beg to get into the Big 10, however they can get into the Big 10. And then you have a West Wing. Then you have, and I looked this up. So if you look at the 25 schools, Power 5 schools, and Notre Dame, they have the best record in the college football playoff era. There's 25, right? The Big Ten has 7 of those schools right now. Next year, Ohio State, Wisconsin, Michigan, Iowa, Penn State, USC, Michigan State. So you add Oregon and Washington on top of that, you have 9. You have 9 of the best 25, quote-unquote, power schools or whatever we're calling them going into the 12-team era.
Washington's in there?
Yeah, they're top 20. I mean, they've been in the playoff. They've been in the playoff. They've been
some really bad years, too.
They had some really good years with Peterson, and they were they're right on that fringe. So Washington, Oregon, these are just Power 5 schools. So the Pac-12's 3 schools in that list are Oregon, Washington, Utah. And so unless those 3 can convince everybody else to stick together and create an alternative football source, you mentioned, I can't take credit for this, you said yesterday, for Oregon or Washington to be like the Gonzaga of college football. It's a great analogy. Problem with it on the football side is Gonzaga gets a chance to prove it in the tournament every year. And Gonzaga is not even a mid-major anymore. They can play in that West Coast Conference, but they're a number 1 or number 2 seed every year based on a 20-year run of success.
So the decision potentially facing Washington and Oregon is to stay in the Pac-12, revised, revamped, watered down with less money, or beg to get into the Big Ten, which they would probably have to accept lesser share at this point than everyone else. So they're making less money, and they're in a geographically challenged conference with Ohio State and Michigan and Penn State and USC. To me, they're not going to sniff the playoff. They would be a favorite for the playoff in the watered down Pac-12. So that's something you got to think about, because you can make up some of the financial difference with playoff money. I don't know the specifics. I don't have the numbers in front of me. I don't know what you get. I don't know how the revenue distribution would be agreed upon in the new Pac-12. I would think they would reward the better teams that make the Pac. That would be the smart way to do it. Trying to get guys to the higher profile programs to stay. So that's kind of the decision that they would have to look at, right? I mean,
Well, I think Oregon would be fine. I mean, I've watched Oregon go into the big house and spank Michigan, and I've watched them. I was there a couple years ago when they went in to
Columbus.
Ohio Stadium and silenced the Buckeyes. Like they're capable of being that kind of heavyweight in the Big Ten. Washington, I don't know. I mean, Washington's very good this year, and Washington's definitely taken steps to be that kind of program. And, so I think that would be their best play if the Pac-12 disintegrates. I think it is. Now, you could we spelled out like kind of a out of the box scenario where they go to the ACC, or an out of the box scenario. They're not going to the SEC. That's not going to happen. Maybe they go to the Big 12 and just continue that kind of merger of, so like the other curveball is like, what if the Big 12 takes Arizona and then takes Washington and Oregon? Something like that. I mean, I don't think that's going to happen either. So I just still think their logical play, if the Pac-12 disintegrates, is to go to the Big 10. The problem with the reduced rate is, and you know this from talking to me over the years, like Big 10 fans still look at Penn State on some level as an outsider, and Nebraska as an outsider. Wait till you're an outsider and you're taking less money. Then they're just going to look at you as like, why do we care what Washington and Oregon think? We threw you that lifeboat. So there is that risk as well. But yeah, I think those are the most logical scenarios for the Ducks and the Huskies.
How do we get here, Bill?
Oh,
Blame game. Time to play the blame game.
I'll let you go first so I can. Yeah, you have your answer.
I have a column that will run should the poor Pac-12 fall apart, which it seems like it's going to. I'm pointing the finger at Kevin Warren's decision to pursue USC and UCLA as a counter punch to the SEC acquiring Oklahoma and Texas. I did not think the Big Ten needed to pursue USC and UCLA. Thought if USC and UCLA stayed in the Pac-12, none of these other dominoes would have fallen. I don't think the Big Ten needed them. They had plenty of revenue. They had plenty of big-time programs already that can compete for national championships, and it disrupted the sport. It's not good for the sport. It's symptomatic of not having a college football commissioner looking out for the best interests of the sport. It's every man for himself. It's every school for themselves. It's every conference for themselves. And we're going to have overall a poorer sport because of the decision. The first domino to me was that USC and UCLA left the Pac-12 in a tough spot. I thought the Big 12 kind of bounced back from Oklahoma and Texas leaving. That Oklahoma and Texas stayed in a reasonably regional conference when they decided to go to the SEC. They wanted to leave. They were looking at the Pac-12, the SEC. Of course, they're going to try to get to the SEC. SEC said, "Come on in." And then the Big Ten, I felt like they needed to throw a counterpunch, and they did. And now you're seeing just conferences that are illogical geographically and potentially disappearing from the Power Five.
I mean, the Big Ten can share the blame. How can you say that about the Big Ten? The SEC literally took the Big 12's heart out. Texas and Oklahoma. So it's okay for the SEC to rip the Big 12's two power brands out, and it's not okay for the Big Ten to do the same thing?
I don't feel like that's the way it played out.
That's exactly the way it played out.
I feel like Oklahoma and Texas were going to leave. They wanted to either leave for the Pac-12 or the SEC, and they pursued the SEC, and the SEC said yes. I feel like I could be wrong, but I feel like the Big Ten actively pursued USC and UCLA. I don't know that UCLA and USC were looking around as much as Texas and Oklahoma were.
I mean, I would blame a lot of people. I think that there's more than enough blame to go around. Hey, you can blame the SEC and Greg Sankey. You don't need Texas and Oklahoma. You've won all these national championships without them. Why do you need to take – if you really – I talked to you about this yesterday. the sport has gone national when it thrives on being regional still. Like you didn't have to go get Texas and Oklahoma. You win the national championships now. You're adding two schools that I think fan-wise, Texas and Oklahoma, we'll see in 10 years if they enjoy going to Florida and going to Mississippi State and going to, the other side of that rivalry. So I blame the Big 12 25 years ago, or, I blame the Longhorn Network in Texas because that led to untrustworthy relationships with Nebraska. That led to Nebraska leaving. Nebraska left for the Big 10. A&M left. Missouri left. Colorado left. None of and we have a piece at Sporting News talking about that, where of those four schools, the only one that's kind of benefited was A&M, who's Texas's sibling, so to speak, and they fight all the time. And now they're back in the same conference. So I blame Texas and the Longhorn Network. I blame Notre Dame for not just joining the Big 10.
Whoa.
Yeah, I'll throw that out there. How about you join a conference full time instead of talking about it and taking advantage of a 5-game arrangement with the ACC? And Notre Dame fans, and I know we're on Irish Breakdown, be like, well, we have a history. Nobody cares about 1910. Don't care about the squabble of 1910 when William Taft was president. I don't care. The Big Ten offered them in 1990. They could have taken it. They could say, well, we're not a regional program. Well, nobody's a region. Ohio State's not a regional program either. They do just fine. Michigan's not a regional program. Notre Dame should be in the Big Ten. If the Big Ten had Notre Dame, they wouldn't have gone out and got USC and UCLA. Most of all, Bill, though, I blame the Pac-12. I blame the Pac-12 for letting this happen. They're the ones that made an environment such that USC and UCLA would leave. That should never have happened. They could have got Oklahoma and Texas. They could have got a better TV deal. They could have kept these schools together. But at the end of the day, we can blame whoever we want. It comes down to the 12-team playoff, money, corporate greed. And that's what's behind it. And for better or worse, whatever good things it creates, it has ripped that regionality out of the sport.
Now, you are planning on going to the Ohio State at Notre Dame game in September.
Yeah.
Be sure to avoid any of our Irish Breakdown listeners because they're not going to be happy hearing that Notre Dame is the cause for all.
Well, they're not the cause of it, but they are a contributing factor. And I'll say, okay, and then I'll tell those people that say, this is a Notre Dame Ohio State game. It is awesome. It would be awesome every year with a Big Ten logo on your chest. It's better than watching your 5 ACC games against Louisville, Duke, Florida State, whoever. You can't, and I'll ask any Notre Dame fan, including Brian Driscoll, who we talked to, and we've had this conversation. Can't tell me Ohio State Notre Dame isn't awesome. Can't tell me Michigan Notre Dame wasn't awesome. Can't tell me Michigan State Notre Dame or Purdue Notre Dame wasn't awesome. And you could have it almost every year. Oh, and by the way, USC, who you like to fall back on that rivalry, they're going to be in the Big Ten. What if Stanford's in the Big Ten? Where are you going to be? I think, but to me, mostly it's just money and greed. It's about money. It's about greed. It's about, and I get it. And it's about making a model that's more like the NFL when you make something that's like the difference between the NFL and the college football. The NFL is about money and greed too, but
the NFL has a commissioner.
The NFL has a commissioner, and the NFL
teams are not poaching. The AFC East teams are not poaching teams from the NFC South.
No, and when you watch an NFL game and you watch the NFL in general, it comes with if you are an NFL fan, it has to come with the exception of, this league's all about money and TV and greed. But you still watch the product because it's the best sports product in the world. I don't watch a lot of soccer. I get that, but the NFL has the best sports product on the planet. And college football is trying to catch on to that a little bit. And, it's going to come at the expense of its soul. And this is what's happened, right? It's kind of your next question, right? Is this good for the sport? I would say no. Not at all, right? The fact that you're going to have to choke down let's run down some potential matchups here in the future. Like UCF versus Colorado is not going to excite people. Good for UCF. They made the trek up,
Right, but they're in a league with people now on the West Coast potentially, which just makes no sense.
UCF, Utah, UCF,
Arizona?
Arizona. That's, like this is, but for UCF, they'll say, yeah, we got a seat at the big table, right? Arizona, hey, our table seat's a little bit better. It's not as, I don't know though. We could get into the 12-team era and these 16-team conferences. And I know when USC plays Ohio State for the first time, I'll be pretty amped up about it. It'll be cool. So
Well, so you did a good analysis on sportingnews.com this week about how teams have fared when they have switched conferences, Power 5 teams, Power 5 leagues since 2000. What were your main takeaways from that?
Miami has, so one part of the exercise, I got to spell this out for listeners, is we looked at, say, Miami. We're going to use Miami. 2004, they joined the ACC. So we took their 19 seasons in the ACC and measured it against 19 previous seasons. And we did that with all 15 schools that either moved to a Power 5 conference by moving up or a lateral move. So Miami, their winning percentage has been reduced by 25% as a program since joining the ACC. That's stunning. That was the most stunning find. Of those 15 schools, only 4 have a higher winning percentage as a program since moving. And it was not the answers you would expect. It was like Virginia Tech, Pitt. Texas A&M actually has a higher winning percentage moving to the SEC, and Syracuse, who, I mean, let's be honest, that's between like 3 wins and 4 wins. So
the Texas A&M, the dirty little secret is they were not good in the Big 12. That's
right. You and I talked about that. They were kind of, I think Texas A&M has benefited from realignment from the standpoint that you and I probably spend a lot more time talking about Texas A&M than we would. And a big part of that, and we will have a piece at Sporting News about this next week, is the Johnny Manziel thing. I mean, they came into the SEC. They got Johnny Manziel, who won a Heisman. He was literally the most polarizing football player. If we did a list of most polarizing football players my lifetime, which is 43 years, he'd be right 1, 2, maybe. Bosworth would be right there and a couple others, but he's in the top 5. So, and we're spending a lot of time this year talking about Jimbo and Petrino. So they have elevated the attention to the program. Yes. They like attention. The bad news for them is the program in college football that gets the most attention and likes the most attention of any program in college football is coming. And that's Texas. You thought I could have said Notre Dame, but I didn't. I said Texas. So, but it was a fun exercise. It was a lot of,
it's going to be interesting to track all these new teams that are going to be added to that list. It's no longer just going to be 15. It's going to be in the 20s, and who knows how long. And the guess is Oklahoma, Texas, not going to work out. UCLA is not going to win more in the Big Ten than they are in the Pac-12. So
UCLA, Minnesota, you're going to have to choke that one down on a Saturday. Like it's not great in some ways, but at the same time, I've learned to get older. I guess you have an open mind about these things and watch it, but I just can't help but think that the answer just comes down to Tim May, a friend of the podcast, Letterman Row, Ohio State writer. I tweeted that yesterday. I was like, who's to blame for this, right? And all the answers were Jim Delaney, Big Ten, Texas, SEC, everything we just ran down basically. And then Tim tweeted Gordon Gekko, and some guy tweeted, how I don't see the connection to an 80s movie character, and all I have to do is watch the movie and hear Gordon Gekko say greed is good. That's the root cause of all this. It's greed. It's
greed. It's lack of a commissioner.
Yes. That's the problem.
Right. So, all right, we shall return before we get out of here to the Troche trivia question. As we discussed realignment the last time, Colorado won 10-plus games as a member of the Big 12, was in 2001. Interesting year. Like I said, they knocked off Nebraska 62-36 in the last game of the regular season. Then they upset Texas in the Big 12 championship game, which somehow got Nebraska into the BCS championship game. And then they lost to Oregon in the Fiesta Bowl. They had 2 quarterbacks share duties. They had 2 running backs share duties. Can you name either pair of the Colorado Buffaloes from 2001?
I think I can get one quarterback and one running back. I know
Okay.
one of the running backs for sure is Chris Brown.
Yes, sir.
I remember him because he was on my fantasy team. And then
he went on to a good NFL career.
who's
The
the
other
other?
one did not make the NFL.
Who's the other running back? No idea.
Bobby Purify.
I would not have got that. I don't. There's
Okay.
guys on Twitter that would get that. That's beyond me. Tuasiasopo. Oh my gosh.
Tuiasosopo. No, it's
He's
not.
not. Okay.
No.
So the quarterbacks I'm going to struggle on. I know Jewel Clatt came later, so it's not him.
It's tough. I'm telling you.
Like, go ahead. So just
Craig Ox.
I wouldn't have got that in a million years.
And Bobby Pesavento.
No, yeah, this is a little. That's tough. I did get Chris Brown, so I'm giving myself.
Funny thing is, it's a memorable team. That was a memorable
Right.
season. Those are some crazy things that they did. They played in some high-profile games. But yeah, I looked at those. I was like, "Whoa!"
Chris Brown, I remember because I think he went on to the Titans and was
a
decent NFL running back. So
he was. But yeah, I thought Bobby Purify. You might get Bobby.
That was a tough one. Yeah, it rings a very vague bell. But like I said, that was. Anything you get me on 99 to 02, there's a chance I was on Court Street instead of watching a college football game. So, or watching a college football game on Court Street, which I'll just leave it at that.
Which isn't a bad way to spend a Saturday.
No, exactly.
All right. Well, thanks to everyone for listening to the CFB Nation All-America podcast. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we will see you next week.